everyone, and welcome to our lesson on comma splices and run-ons. I don't know about you, but these are my least favorite grammatical terms, and if I had my way, we would banish them altogether. Unfortunately, I don't have that power, and too many other writing resources use these terms, so I feel compelled to use them also. But truth be told, I detest them both because they cause so much confusion. I'm not sure if any grammatical terms get misdefined more often than comma splices and run-ons. I've heard run-ons defined as sentences that go on, which is a terrible definition because people end up thinking of run-ons as really long sentences, which is not accurate at all. I know many students think of comma splices as misplaced commas or missing commas, which is also inaccurate. Run-ons and comma splices are basically the same error. Both occur when two or more sentences are punctuated as one. In other words, you have more than one sentence placed together without a period indicating where one sentence ends and the next one begins. Technically, a run-on occurs when no punctuation is placed between two sentences. For example, don't get me wrong, I love jumping through hoops. We have two statements here. Don't get me wrong, we're commanding the reader to not get me wrong, and I love jumping through hoops. But there's no punctuation between these two statements. That makes it a run-on. When we have two or more complete sentences without any punctuation between them, then it's considered a run-on. A comma splice occurs when a comma is placed where a period could go. So in this example, we basically have the same error, except now we have a comma between our two sentences. But we can't place commas at the end of sentences, we have to use periods. That means that comma splices and run-ons are basically the same error. In both cases, we have two or more sentences put together as one. The only difference is that a comma splice has a comma where a period could go. So these are basically the same error, and both can be repaired by adding a period to separate your two sentences. Sometimes it might be preferable to use a conjunction to combine them together, but by definition, if it's a comma splice or a run-on, you can always fix it grammatically by just adding a period and adjusting your capitalization. So here we have the dog howled, the cat meowed. We have two verbs and two subjects, or two actions, howled and meowed, and two actors, dog and cat. We have two verbs and two subjects, but no end punctuation, no periods separating the two sentences, and no conjunctions combining them together. So since there's no punctuation where that period could go, this is considered a run-on. If we place a comma where that period could go, now it's a comma splice. But it's only considered a comma splice if the comma appears where a period could go. If we look at this final example, we have the dog comma howled, the cat meowed. This example is a run-on because where the period could go, we have no punctuation. We do have a misplaced comma on there, but again, a comma splice is not a misplaced comma. A comma splice occurs only when a comma is used where a period could go. In this class, I'm not going to ask you to distinguish between comma splices and run-ons because I think it's more important that you understand that they're basically the same error. They have nothing to do with sentence length. A run-on is not a sentence that goes on and on and on. A comma splice is not a misplaced comma. Both occur when you have two or more sentences put together as one. So I'll let you know that comma splices are less alarming errors. When a student has a comma splice in their writing, it's not quite as worrisome because at least they can tell where the sentences separate. However, because there's so much confusion about these terms, I treat them as basically the same error. And when I ask you to decide whether a statement is a fragment, a complete sentence, or a comma splice or run-on, I'm basically testing whether you can recognize an incomplete sentence, a complete sentence, or more than one sentence. Okay, so hopefully this has cleared up some confusion about the terms. Hopefully you now understand what comma splices and run-ons are, and hopefully the rest of this presentation will help you recognize comma splices and run-ons in your own writing and understand how to fix them. Now, grammatically, all comma splices and run-ons can be repaired by simply adding a period. If you think something's a comma splice or a run-on, but you can't fix it by just adding a period and maybe adjusting your capitalization, then it's not a comma splice or a run-on. It's only a comma splice or a run-on when you have two or more sentences punctuated as one. So here we have the dog howled, period, the cat meowed, period. Grammatically, that's correct. So that solves our comma splice or run-on. We've placed a period to separate our two sentences. Now, in this case, I don't think it's the best solution. You can always fix it grammatically by adding a period, but sometimes you might want to combine the clauses together by adding a conjunction. So we could also fix this by combining it and saying the dog howled and the cat meowed. Or, as the dog howled, the cat meowed. Or, the dog howled when the cat meowed. So in this case, I think it's better to combine them, especially those last two, because they really show a relationship between the two ideas, that these happened at the same time. Now, in student writing, though, I would say most often adding a period is probably the best choice. It's kind of like the same advice I gave you for fixing fragments. In student writing, sometimes fragments occur because they're just writing quickly. In the diagnostic essays, I noticed that they occurred quite a bit because students were just using very poetic language. And, it was almost like they turned in a poem. So they do occur for other reasons, but most of the time when I spot fragments, they've just added a period where they don't need one. So if they read it out loud, it sounds fine. They just need to fix their punctuation. That's also true when I spot comma splices and run-ons in student writing. Occasionally, they're using conversational language and they might be leaving out a conjunction, usually because. When that happens, it's usually because or since. But most of the time, it sounds fine the way it's written, and they just need to separate their clauses with a period. So keep in mind that you can fix comma splices and run-ons by adding a conjunction and combining the statements together, but if you read it out loud, if you're happy with your wording, then just fix your punctuation. Just use a period to separate your sentences. Now, if you have trouble recognizing comma splices and run-ons, you want to remind yourself that sentence structure has nothing to do with length. A complete sentence could be a single word long, it could be 1,000,000 words long, a fragment could be 1,000,000 words long, and a run-on or comma splice could be 2 words long. So length has absolutely nothing to do with it. Sentence structure is all about subjects, verbs, and conjunctions. Every sentence must contain at least one subject and one verb. It also has to be independent and be able to stand on its own, but it has to have at least one subject and one verb. If you have 2 subjects and 2 verbs, then you want to ask yourself, are these subjects and verbs being joined together with a conjunction? And there's a few different ways we could do that. So we could use a coordinating conjunction. If we look at this example, we have, I shot the sheriff, but I did not shoot the deputy. So in this statement, we have 2 subjects and 2 verbs. We have the verb shot, and we have the verb phrase did not shoot. We also have 2 subjects. We have I shot and I did not shoot. So we have 2 subjects and 2 verbs, but they're being joined together with a conjunction. So now we're good. If they're being joined together with a conjunction, then you can have 2 subjects and 2 verbs in the same sentence. So it might be a coordinated conjunction like in this statement, or it might be a subordinating conjunction if we say, although I shot the sheriff, I did not shoot the deputy. But if you have 2 subjects and 2 verbs, they have to be joined together somehow. Maybe with a coordinating conjunction, maybe with a subordinating conjunction. There's at least one other way you might have more than one subject and more than one verb in the same sentence, and that's if you're using a relative pronoun to describe a noun in more detail. So I won't go into this in too much depth, but pronouns are words that stand in for nouns, like it, he, she, they, them, I, you. Relative pronouns are used to add extra information to nouns. So we have which, that, when, whom, whose, where, what, and why. Now, if you look at this statement, we have this dog belongs to the guy who lives down the street. We have belongs and lives as our verbs, and we have dog as our subject. We also have guy for lives. So we have this dog belongs, and then we have the guy who lives down the street. So we do have a subject and a verb here, but this who is allowing us to go into more detail. We could just say, this dog belongs to Bill, or this dog belongs to my neighbor. But we're using this phrase to describe its owner. We're saying, this dog belongs to the guy who lives down the street. Okay, but in any case, if you have more than one subject and more than one verb in the same sentence, ask yourself, do I have a conjunction of some kind, or am I using a word like who or that or which to go into more detail about a noun? If not, then you're going to have a comma splice or a run-on. So you can remember, you can always fix it by adding a period. So if you're tempted to mark something as a comma splice and a run-on, but you can't fix it by just adding a period, then you want to rethink that. Maybe it's not a comma splice or a run-on. Okay, so let's look at a few statements together, and we're just going to decide, is this a fragment, is it a complete sentence, or is it more than one complete sentence? And in that case, it'd be a comma splice or a run-on. So we need to make sure we have a subject and a verb, and that the statement can stand on its own. So if it can't stand on its own, it's a fragment. If it can't stand on its own, we're good. If we have more than one subject and more than one verb, then we have to ask ourselves, are they joined together somehow? Do we have a conjunction joining them together? Or are we using a relative phrase to add more detail to a noun? Okay, so our first statement is, come quickly, the house is on fire. So to decide, you want to ask yourself, do we have any verbs? And we have the verb come and the verb is. What's our subject for is? The house. The house is on fire. The subject is always that actor. So we have the house is, who's our subject for come quickly, who should come quickly. That's a command, so our subject is you. So this statement, we have a comma splice, or a comma splice run-on. If you said run-on, I would give you credit. We have two sentences put together as one. Come quickly is a command. That's a statement that can stand on its own, so we need come quickly, period. The house is on fire. This next statement reads, meaning that I couldn't attend school. So we want to spot our verbs. We have the verb phrase couldn't attend, could not attend. And then what's our subject for couldn't attend? I couldn't attend school. I couldn't attend school, that would be complete by itself. But now we have this meaning that phrase. This meaning that, it's kind of conversational, but I see this quite a bit in student writing. And if it's treated by itself, it's creating a fragment. So I would stay away from the meaning that altogether because it is a little conversational. But if you use it, you're using it to go into more detail about something you've just said. So you need something like, the doctor ordered me to rest for 6 weeks, comma, meaning that I couldn't attend school. Here we have the fact that we never sing together. So we have sing as a verb, or we could say never sing is our verb phrase. And then we have we for our subject. So we never sing together, that could be complete. But now we have this opening, the fact that. And if you remember the word that, relative pronouns like that or who or which, they're used to go into more detail about a noun. So this is a fragment. This statement cannot stand on its own. This whole phrase is simply describing the fact that we never sing together. We could describe the fact that the world is round, or the fact that all sentences need subjects and verbs, but we're talking about the fact that we never sing together. So by itself, this whole phrase just describes a single noun. We need something like, the fact that we never sing together breaks my heart, or I am saddened by the fact that we never sing together. Let's look at two more. Here we have, my favorite band is the New Kids on the Block. They are so talented. So we have the verbs is and are, and we have the subjects band and they. My favorite band is, they are. We have two subjects, two verbs, but we don't have any conjunctions joining them together. So this is an example of a run-on, or if you said comma splice, I would give you credit. Just know that we have two separate sentences here. My favorite band is the New Kids on the Block, period. They are so talented. This last one reads, as long as my friend Theodore promises to pick me up at 6 o'clock every morning and take me home by 5 o'clock every evening, I'm fairly certain that never in my life will I have to take out a car loan, pay for gas, purchase an auto insurance policy, pay for mechanical repairs, or pay fines or court costs associated with traffic tickets. So, in this statement, we have the verb promises, or you could look at promises to pick as the verb phrase. And then we have Theodore for our subject. We also have this verb take. But this take is something else that Theodore is doing. So we have two verbs for Theodore, but we have and joining them together. We also have am in here. We have the contraction I'm, but I'm stands for I am. So we also have this verb am in here, and we have the subject I. So now we have another subject and verb. But this is joined together with as long as. As long as subordinates this first clause, and it joins it to this next clause, I'm fairly certain that. So we have as long as my friend Theodore promises to pick me up at 6 o'clock every morning and take me home by 5 o'clock every evening, I'm fairly certain that I'll never have to do these things. So now we have this that phrase, and that's telling us that this is just describing what I'm fairly certain I will never have to do. So this is a long sentence, and if it's in your own writing, you might want to trim it down for other purposes. You might want to get rid of the unnecessary language in here, but grammatically it's one sentence. We're basically just saying, as long as Theodore does everything for me, I won't have to do anything. We've added more details in it, but grammatically it's still just one single sentence. I always include a sentence like this when I'm reviewing run-ons and comma splices. I include statements like this on tests. Sometimes maybe it will be a comma splice or a run-on, but sometimes it might be a really long fragment or a really long sentence. So get out of the habit of thinking of run-ons as really long sentences. Sentence structure has nothing to do with length. You want a subject and a verb, and you want to make sure the sentence can stand on its own.